Greetings. Welcome to English 245. I'm Professor Pachel, and I will be your guide through many classical works. This is my lecture on Book I of the Iliad, The Wrath of Achilles. Now, just from the title, you can see that wrath is going to be a theme, and it's a theme throughout the Iliad. Um, Wrath was a word originally reserved for a particular type of virulent anger reserved for the gods usually. But in the Iliad, it is most often applied to Achilles, the greatest Greek warrior, the fastest runner. And this book opens up, we are in the 10th year of the Trojan War. So we're in the last year of the Trojan War. And interestingly enough, our scene doesn't open with fighting between the Trojans and the Greeks. Rather, it is an argument among the Greeks. And Achilles' wrath is directed at Agamemnon, who is the supreme leader of the Greek forces at Troy. What happens is in this book, Book I, The Wrath of Achilles, it's almost like it's broken up into two sections. And I call these sections the mortals and the immortals. Now, just a quick aside here, mortals are humans. They're people who have no god blood in them at all. They are doomed to die. They have limited lifespans, whereas the immortals are the gods, and we're usually talking about the Olympians: Zeus, Hera, Hephaestus, Apollo, Athena, and so on. And these are undying beings. They have very human attributes. They seem fickle. We start off with the humans. We start off with a dispute. And so I'm going to go with the mortals, which is on lines 1 to 350 in Book I. And this famous war epic begins with a dispute among the Greek leaders. Agamemnon has angered the god Apollo by the capture of Chryseis and refusing to return her for the offering of her father's ransom. And Apollo is evoked by Chryseis, who is his priest, and Chryseis is his daughter. So Chryseis tries to go to the Greek forces, offers them ransom for his daughter, and he is mocked by Agamemnon and turned away with threat of death. So Chryseis, the priest of Apollo, invokes Apollo and sort of says, "Hey, get me justice, man. I'm being mistreated. They have my daughter. Uh, she was taken from your temple." And Apollo complies. Apollo starts raining death down on the Greek forces. This goes on for a period of 10 days. And finally, Achilles has had it. Achilles is the greatest warrior of the Greeks. He is the fastest runner. He is the fleet-footed, they call him often. And he says, we've got to do something, right? The Greeks realized they must turn Chryseis to Apollo's temple and to her father. But Agamemnon stubbornly refuses to let Chryseis return to her father and temple until he has another prize. And his choice is Briseis, who is a Trojan woman who was taken also by the Greeks and awarded to Achilles. So this is sort of a competition of wills and of manly macho-ness, really, in a lot of ways. Agamemnon's position is something like, if I can't have this one, then I'm going to take the woman from the greatest warrior that we have to show that I'm still leader, right? Now, partly in the dispute, a priest, he's actually a seer, which means he can read bird entrails and kind of tell the future. His name is Calchas, right? And he becomes involved slightly and warns Agamemnon that if they do not return Chryseis to Apollo's temple, it's going to be doom and gloom for the Greeks. Okay, well, Agamemnon not only refuses to listen to him, but he insults him and mocks him and tells him to go away, essentially. Uh, so Achilles is sort of interesting, and I think that he is obviously he's fascinating. He's a complicated character, much more complicated than he seems. He is reluctantly at Troy. He exclaims openly that he has no grudge against the Trojans. They've never done anything to him. They've never taken his sheep or attacked his people. And he's only here out of a sense of duty to his fellow Greeks when they were mobilized to go and rescue Helen from Troy. And he does not like the way that Agamemnon is treating him. So Achilles is about to draw his sword on Agamemnon. The argument gets very heated, and he is stopped by the goddess Athena, and only he can see her. Now, Athena is the goddess of many things: wisdom, war, weaving, the three W's, I guess you could say. And she appears behind Achilles only so that he can see her, right? And she says, this would be really bad. Don't fight Agamemnon. Don't kill him. You guys have to stay together. So Achilles complies. He does not bring violence upon Agamemnon, although the two insult each other um, pretty adeptly throughout the argument. And Achilles really shows a distinct lack of respect for his leader, Agamemnon. In fact, Achilles claims that he does most of the fighting, he takes most of the risks, and Agamemnon takes most of the treasure and the booty and the glory. So uh, there's some discontent in the Greek ranks. Finally, Agamemnon decides to relent, and even though he says that he is going to take Briseis from Achilles' tent himself, this shows a little bit about Agamemnon's character. He sends a couple of henchmen over to get her. And it's almost like maybe that would be too much if he went himself to take Briseis away from Achilles. So these two henchmen go and get Briseis. They take her back, right? And Achilles is completely wrathful. He feels like he's been mistreated and wronged. And he says he will no longer fight for the Greeks, and they will be at Hector and the Trojans' mercy. And we do know that Achilles is the greatest hero of the Greeks, that when he is fighting with them, it seems like they can't lose. And this is disturbing news for the Greek army that Achilles is not going to fight with them. Now, I'd like to contrast Agamemnon and Achilles in deference to the gods, the immortals, the gods. Um, Agamemnon stubbornly refuses to obey the will of the gods, even when at the risk of his own men dying. And in fact, he loses lots of men just for that reason, that he will not obey the gods. Okay. Achilles, on the other hand, for all of his wrath and for all of his seemingly erratic behavior, obeys Athena when she tells him that he must not fight Agamemnon and he must hang on. So Achilles shows proper piety, which is reverence for the gods, right? And he says, if a man heeds the gods, they also listen to him. That's line 218. Another character gets involved here. This is Nestor, and he would be more respected by Agamemnon as he is not a priest or a seer. He is an old warrior, very experienced. He's a veteran. He's he's fought with the older generation of Greek heroes, and we always know that the older generations are supposedly better than the present generations. So they both sort of listen to Nestor, and he tries to calm them down. And he does convince Agamemnon that he has to take Chryseis back to Chryses, her father, but he is unable to stop Agamemnon from taking Briseis. Okay. So, so that's where we are now. So Achilles, still wrathful and even tearful, and this is a big bad Greek warrior, right? The biggest and baddest, appeals to his mother. His mother is Thetis. She is a goddess. She's a lesser, she's a demigoddess, what we would call. So she has some pull with unearthly matters, right? And he says, "Hey, man, I've been dishonored. I've been shamed. I've been mistreated by the Greek forces. Can't you do anything?" And Thetis comforts him, right? And she says that she will appeal to Zeus, who she has some favor with. She once helped Zeus out when the other gods revolted against him and tied him up and were going to kill him. She helped free him. So Thetis has some good karma built up with Zeus. So she thinks she can trade on this to get favor for her son in this difficult situation. Now, Zeus, and we're going to switch to the immortals here in a second. Zeus is away at a 12-day feast in Ethiopia, partying with the Ethiopians, and he won't be back. And I guess he's out of contact. He didn't bring any communication devices. So Thetis has to wait until that party's over and he comes back to Olympus. Meanwhile, the Greeks, under the command of Odysseus, return Chryseis to her father and make amends with Apollo through ceremonies and sacrifice and ritual purifications. That is accounted on lines 435 to 485. Now, as we move on to the immortals, this is going to be about lines 493 to line 612. Zeus finally comes back from the 12-day party in Ethiopia. And Thetis comes to him. They're all around the big banquet table in Olympus. Zeus is at the head, right? Hera's there, Zeus's wife, and Hera is always suspicious of Zeus and sort of jealous of any woman who comes near him. And Thetis shows up, right? She comes in supplication, which means she gets down on her knees and puts one arm around Zeus's knees and one arm on his chin, one hand on his chin, and this is sort of a begging position, right? This is uh, it's called supplication. It's humbling yourself before a powerful person to beg their favors, right? So she brings up that she helped Zeus, and this is around 505 to 517. She brings up what she did for Zeus when she helped him escape from the other gods when they were rebelling against him. And says, big guy, you owe me a favor. I really saved your bacon back then, and my son's in trouble. So Zeus knows that this is going to cause problems between him and Hera, right? Because not only is Thetis a woman, a demigoddess, and she is supplicating herself to Zeus, but also Hera is firmly on the side of the Greeks, right? Zeus kind of goes back and forth, but he seems to favor the Trojans a little more than he does the Greeks. So, and further, he does not want to get involved in this, right? He knows that Thetis wants him to make the Greek army suffer. Uh, so, and he knows Hera will be really angry if he does this. So he says to Thetis, I'm not going to answer you right now, but watch my face, watch my head, and I'm going to give you a nod. His ambrosial mane goes down, our poet says, right? And he gives her the nod. And Hera notices the nod from Zeus to Thetis and is instantly suspicious. And we get this on lines 535 to 545. A really tense argument breaks out between Zeus and Hera. She accuses him of suspicious behavior and doing something to undermine the Greeks in their siege of Troy. And Zeus starts getting angry, right? And when Hera questions Zeus, he actually threatens physical violence. He says, if I get my hands on you, you're not going to be happy. And that's line 567. So Hephaestus gets up, And Hephaestus is in the generation of gods after Zeus and Hera. So he's actually their son. And he says, hey, mom and dad, please don't fight. We're all having a good time here. We're having fun, right? We're drinking ambrosia. It's Olympus. We're having a feast. He says, and remember what happened when I stood up against Zeus once. And the story goes that Zeus grabbed Hephaestus and threw him down to the earth where he was stunned and he had to be administered to by the locals where he fell until he kind of got his stuff together and could come back to Olympus. And he's sort of like, Mom, you don't want to do that. It's going to be really bad. Okay, so uh, he does what a lot of people do in this situation, and he gets Hera to start drinking. Okay, and the argument stops. All the gods resume their merrymaking, and this section ends with Zeus and Hera retiring to bed together, seemingly happy. And all the gods go into their houses, which Hephaestus built, by the way, and just kind of after a night of feasting and partying, let's get some sleep. And it sounds like all is okay. So, a little bit of analysis. The major conflicts among the mortals and the conflict among the immortals are caused by the outrageous arrogance, or what we call hubris. Hubris is the Greek word for the outrageous arrogance that angers the gods, right? And Agamemnon not only defiled Apollo's temple and raided it, but he took the priest Croesus's daughter Croesus, and then he refused to listen to Calchas and to Croesus when they both came to him to implore him to let the girl go, right? So this is Agamemnon's prideful arrogance, okay? And we'll see this throughout the ancient world, particularly with the Greeks, what is called hubris, right? And hubris um, is, I guess you could say that Agamemnon eventually shows piety for the gods, but it's a reluctant piety, and this is noted. Okay, and even though he has some favor with the gods, this is going to cause problems. And though the Greeks will ultimately take Troy, they will suffer nemesis, which is fitting punishment for hubris. Okay, lots of people misuse the term nemesis in current speech and dialogue. People say things like, man, who's a Cuervo? That's my nemesis, right? Which is not really what nemesis is. Nemesis is, remember this, fitting punishment for hubris. So for Agamemnon's hubris, his men are going to suffer. He's going to suffer. Eventually, all this will come back to them. And it's Agamemnon's stubbornness, his pride, his arrogance that is outrageous enough to offend the gods. uh, think about this. Some other things to think about. When mortals have conflicts, they suffer and they risk death. Uh, in fact, mortals always have the risk of dying, right? Uh, so this argument between Achilles and Agamemnon could easily have ended up in death, probably Agamemnon's death. Um, and we know that both Agamemnon and Achilles are doomed to die, largely for their partaking in the Trojan War and for their hubris that they both, to some measure, display, right? Um, and something about Achilles, he is part God, but his mother has already told him he's going to have a short life and a glorious one. How'd you like that? You know, you're not going to live very long, son, but you're going to be famous and you're going to go down in history and in legends. So Achilles knows he's going to die early. Agamemnon does not, but he will. What does this mean for us? contrasting the mortals and the immortals, uh, and I think the Greeks really picked up on this, and this is that mortal lives have more intrinsic value in a lot of ways than the lives of the immortals. Mortals can suffer loss, which it seems like the gods never suffer permanent loss. Okay, mortals also seem to have stronger convictions, believing in what they do, sticking to something that they commit to. Whereas the gods, we'll find, are very fickle, change their minds. Mortals die. They put people in danger. They do things that cause great strife for the mortals or the humans. So, so remember that mortals can suffer loss, which is something that the gods are lacking. That may sound strange, but it also gives mortals their vitality, their character. It's almost like if you were playing blackjack or something with a dealer who couldn't lose, but you could lose. I guess all blackjack is kind of like that for any card players out there, right? The odds are always stacked against the player. The house rules, right? So the same way with the mortals and the immortals, the odds are always stacked against the mortals. And the gods are always going to be able to go back to their Olympus party and drink ambrosia. The gods also manipulate and meddle in mortals' affairs, often ruining lives and destroying families and entire communities. And then what do they do afterwards? Go back to their parties, right? Go back to their hall at Olympus, hang out, cheat on each other, lie. They are not what we think of in, say, Judeo-Christian theology, or any kind of, say, mainstream world religion, where they're good, they're all-knowing. It sometimes seems like the gods, first of all, ideas that we have about good and evil are completely foreign to the Greek gods. They pretty much do whatever they want to do when they want to do it, and rarely concern themselves with the consequences. And when the gods have conflicts, they often end with merriment, feasting, drinking, ambrosia, and eventually sleep, with no responsibility, no sense of responsibility for the effects of their actions on mortal lives. It's just kind of one of those things they feel like happens. Okay. Uh, Important to mortals in the ancient world, and a prevalent theme in classical literature, is that actions have consequences. Okay. And that's sort of what all this adds up to. So Agamemnon's decision to take Briseis from Achilles, that's going to have far reaching consequences. When Achilles refuses to fight, the Greeks are going to be suffer heavy casualties from the Trojans. Their morale is down. They don't have their premier hero on the battlefield. And this is going to cause great strife for them. We also know that eventually Agamemnon will be murdered by his wife when he gets home, right? The Greek forces will be broken up and scattered all over after they take Troy. And as far as Achilles and his wrath, it causes the death of Hector, the Trojan hero, who is sort of his counterpart. And it also, Achilles' wrath will put events into order that will lead to the fall of Troy and eventually to his own doom by being killed by Paris and with the power of Apollo by a bow. None of that is in the is in the Iliad. Interestingly enough, we never get to see Troy fall during the course of the Iliad. We don't see the Trojan horse. Those stories come from other sources, but they were very old stories. The Greeks would have known them at the time, and the Greeks would have been familiar with all of these characters and their outcomes. Uh, so think about that. Actions have consequences. Wrath, while it generates energy, often also has negative outcomes. right? And remember, Achilles is part God, and his anger is not your garden variety anger. It is wrath. Okay, and we're going to get to see that wrath again in our next lecture on the death of Hector. Uh, but consider this idea that actions have consequences. Okay, consider this in the light of Agamemnon's stubbornness to first of all give up the woman that he took as his war prize, and then his arrogance and just general rudeness in taking Achilles, a war prize, who's a woman. I know it's terrible, right? Briseis, in spite of the fact that Achilles is his best man and his best hope for winning this war. Okay, so that's where we're going to leave it. We're going to see more consequences of these early days, and remember, this is really kind of interesting that so much has already transpired in this war before the events of the Iliad, right? That they've been at this for 10 years. So you can imagine uh, people are getting edgy, I guess you could say. They're tired of this, right? There's probably some boredom, wounds, people dying. You know, extended wars are just not a good thing. And everyone has their breaking point. And it's interesting that this story starts 10 years into the conflict. The last year of the war is where we pick up in the Iliad. So all sorts of things have happened before we get to this point. But Agamemnon's pride and Achilles' wrath is are two things that are going to carry through here. And we will also want to remember, keep our eyes on the fickleness of the immortals. They play favorites, and they seem to have a complete lack of concern for whatever they do. So keep those things in mind. Know the two terms, hubris and nemesis, and learn these characters' names. And we'll pick up in our next lecture on the death, book 22 of the Iliad, which is the death of Hector. Thank you.